All right, so here we are on Friday, the 22nd of October. This is class 26, and so looking at the future, we've got your next homework assignment due on Monday, and that's largely focused on the benefit cost analysis that we've been doing the last couple of class meetings. Remember that when you do benefit cost analysis, you're just going to be given quantitative assessments of the benefits and the costs. I'm already in the problem statement telling you what's the dollar value of some activity. But in the real world, that's not a straightforward process to try and say what is the number of dollars of benefit that exists when a child can go play on a swing set in a park. You know, what's the dollar value of that? Kind of tricky to say. So what we're going to learn about today when we do this cost effectiveness analysis is another technique that can be used when it's especially difficult to quantify the dollar value of the benefits. So it's another technique that can be used for public sector projects, but it eliminates the necessity of enumerating benefits in a dollar value. All right, so before we start that, remember that in addition to the homework, you should be devoting a little bit of time to thinking about the project, because the deadline for that will be here before you know it. On 11 o'clock on Friday, November 19th, you need to have submitted 2 files. One is your report, so that can either be a PDF file or a Word document. And then the other file that you need to submit is an Excel file that includes your spreadsheet calculations of income, expenses, net saving for each year, and the growth of cumulative savings balance over time. So those are the 2 files that you need to submit. And we've talked a lot over the last few weeks about data sources you can use. And students who earn an A on this project are going to be the ones who kind of put in a little bit of effort to obtaining a variety of estimates for income, and who go one layer deeper than just budgeting when it comes to cost estimation, but actually obtaining real-world cost data for the things that you'd like to do. And when you have identified specific mutual funds or specific stock index funds that you think you may hold in your 401k. So if you kind of put some specific effort into it, then you'll have plenty to say in the report, and you'll end up with a much better grade than someone who didn't take the project as seriously or who left it to the last minute. All right, so what we're looking at here is a picture of a traffic camera. And sometimes these cameras are used only to trigger the traffic signals, but in some places they've started to use them for capturing people who run red lights. I think they definitely need to do that around here, because it seems like there's an epidemic of people running red lights in Huntington. So I previously lived in a place where they gave traffic tickets for speeding by cameras. And so some people would kind of learn where those cameras were set up, and so they'd go really fast and then slow down just to pass the radar, and speed up again. But when it got you, there'd be a little flash, and you'd know, oh, okay, now I have to pay $100 because it caught me speeding. So the reason I show you this image is that it's difficult to quantify the dollar value of something like a system that's used to reduce red light running. You know, because we all know the chain of benefits that accumulate. If fewer people are running red lights, then that means less accidents, and that means less injury. That means reduced damage to property. But it's difficult to say exactly what the dollar value of all of that is, because those are events that didn't happen, like you're preventing something. And so, of course, you can estimate the value by looking at, well, when we do have traffic signals versus we don't, what's the accident rate versus what it isn't. But you know, there's a series of extrapolations that's required, and so there may be some error if you had to say the dollar value of the benefits. The costs are easy to quantify, because you know how much it costs to put up the pole, to purchase the controller, to install the camera. The costs are already in dollar terms, but sometimes the benefits are either too hard or we can't expect enough accuracy in quantifying the benefits for it to be a meaningful exercise. So, cost effectiveness analysis is a technique that's used instead of quantifying the numerical value of the benefits. And this is often used especially in public sector projects that provide intangibles, meaning services. So in the past example on Wednesday's class, we were doing a flood control project. And so that's a physical thing. And it's often easier to quantify the benefits of a physical thing that's built than services like healthcare services, accounting, police, and so on. So those things may be necessary in a public setting. You know, of course, we recognize that it's important to have a police force. But what is the dollar value of their being on the street? There are people out there, economists, who will estimate it, but there may be not as much accuracy in estimating that than when it comes to tangible physical things that are built in public sector projects. So when the benefits are difficult to estimate, we would instead calculate the cost effectiveness ratio. This CER, the cost effectiveness ratio, in the numerator, you just add up all of the costs, and that will be in terms of dollars. But then in the denominator, you'd have some measure of effectiveness, and it won't necessarily be a dollar units there. So for instance, if you think about these different types of services, so in the case of healthcare, it could be how many injections were administered. So the cost of operating a certain office, like for instance, does everybody know that there is an injection center over at the mall right now? They'll do COVID vaccines at the mall. So if you added up the cost of operating that facility, including its rent and utilities and the salary for all the people who are working there, that would be the costs. And then the effectiveness could be how many injections they give in a certain period. And so if your costs were dollars per month, then it might also make sense to have your effectiveness be in terms of injections per month. So you could have the time units be the same in the numerator and the denominator, but it's not necessary that the time units are the same if you're comparing different offices. So for instance, let's say we take the Huntington Injection Center and compare it to some similar facility in Charleston, where they have their own rent that they have to pay, their own salaries, and they're doing a certain number of injections each month. What we would want to do is we want to compare Huntington and Charleston. And so tell me, would you want a high CER or a low CER? Which is more desirable? If you were running the Huntington facility, would you want your ratio to be higher or lower than Charleston?
Lower.
You'd want it to be lower. Exactly right. So why is it good that the ratio is lower? Who sees it? Who sees why lower is better?
Well, because just analyzing the equation here, you can see that the total costs are, in the numerator, and then the effectiveness measures in the denominator. So if the denominator is the effectiveness, you definitely don't want the costs, obviously, to be higher.
Right. You want to minimize costs for every unit of effectiveness. And so let's say that Huntington was doing, okay, so their costs is $4,500 per month, and they, in a month, would do 1,000 injections. Okay, so then that means that it's $4.50 per injection, because the months cancel out. And then Charleston, because it's a fancy city and the rents are higher and everything, maybe there was $5,500 per month, and they were only doing 900 injections. That's per month. Injections per month. And I don't have my calculator handy and can't do that one in my head. What is 5,500 divided by 900? What's going to be their cost per injection? $6.11 per injection. So Huntington wins because their cost per injection, their cost per effectiveness is better. So you can think about any kind of service that's provided and try and quantify what they're doing rather than the dollar value of what they're doing. And so, we could have calculated the value of an injection. And in fact, I heard an economist do that. And the economist says that I heard, his name's Tyler Cohen, he estimates that for every person who gets vaccinated against COVID-19, there's a societal benefit of $10,000 just in the reduced probability of a hospitalized event, the reduced probability of missed work, all of the benefits, $10,000 per person who gets vaccinated. But there's a lot of uncertainty with that. Maybe it's 10,000, maybe it's 8,000, who knows? But what's a lot easier to do is just say, we'll quantify the costs and ignore the dollar value of the benefit for now. And so it could be the same thing with police. The number of tickets that get written in a month. And so if all we're trying to do is compare precincts, like which precinct in Manhattan is most effective at giving parking tickets. So you'd look at what are their staffing costs, how many parking tickets do they issue in a month, and then that would just give you one indicator of who is operating the most efficiently. And of course, any numbers can be abused. One precinct could be writing a bunch of unjustified tickets and getting their numbers more favorable for them. And so you always have to take these numbers with a grain of salt because whoever's doing the thing could have been abusing the statistics. But still, the principle remains that if everyone's behaving rationally and fairly, then this will help you to identify who is operating most efficiently. So are there any questions about this technique so far? All right, so let's go through an example of what if there were 4 different offices that process passport applications. Let's look at the numbers here. Office A, B, C, and D. And we've got an idea of their operation costs, dollars per hour. That would include all of their pay. That would include the rent on an hourly basis that they're working, utilities, and so on. And then we've got their effectiveness in terms of applications per month. Now, in the example I wrote on the whiteboard, we did it with common time units. We had months in the numerator and months in the denominator. Here, I think in this example, I don't bother to calculate the operation cost per month. Although I could have, it's not strictly necessary if all we're doing is comparing these 4 options and trying to identify what has the lowest cost per unit of effectiveness. So watch as I go through these calculations here. Column 1 is just a label of which office. Column 2 is cost. Column 3 is application. So we can calculate the C to E. And so here I've just done dollars per hour and applications per month. And so the time units don't really make sense, but still it's showing me which is the most expensive because it has the highest ratio here. Office D is the most expensive, and Office B is the most efficient because they've got the lowest costs relative to how many applications they're processing. Now, let's sort this. Let's sort the rest so that the most efficient is at the top and the least efficient at the bottom. So that's what I've done here. B is the best, D is the worst, they're at the bottom. And now this column 5 is cumulative cost of operating. So dollars per hour. If we only have Office B open, then we're spending $450 per hour. If we have A and B open, then the sum of those 2 costs is $13.25 per hour. And what if the budget was $1,600 per hour? What if that's our capital rationing parameter? Then what we would want to do is we want to operate Office B and Office A. because we're going to maximize the number of applications that get processed if those are the two offices that we have open. If we had open any other combination of offices, it's going to be less number of applications that are processed. So the idea of capital rationing is you have multiple alternatives, and you're going to accept as many of those alternatives as you've got budget for. But your top priority should be funding the office that is most efficient, and then the second best option, and then you leave your least efficient option for the very last. And that's kind of applicable to a lot of different situations, like electricity production, for instance. There are some cities that generate electricity a variety of different ways. Like they use coal all the time because it's so cheap in terms of cents per kilowatt hour. But then when there's even more demand, maybe then they would use a gas turbine generator because it's a little bit more expensive per unit, but they've already maxed out their capacity at the cheapest option. And then when there's really, really a lot of demand, they might also turn on some diesel generators, which is more expensive, but it's their lowest priority because it's the most expensive per kilowatt hour. So this is just kind of a ranking operation. And what we're going to do in today's in-class exercise is look at 5 different options, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different options for protecting endangered gorillas. We've got an overall budget of $5 million per year. And we have some data about each one of these organizations. We know how many people they have and what is their cost per person per year. And so what you can do for the total cost is just determine, what's their overall budget. And then what we want to calculate is what's the cost effectiveness ratio. And here our measure of effectiveness is how many poachers they arrest per year. And so finally, the last thing that you're going to do is you're going to need to rank in order of most efficient to least efficient and calculate this cumulative cost. And the reason why is we want to find out if you've only got $5 million to spend, which of these should be funded. And what we're assuming here, no partial funding. That means you can't give some of the leftover money to partly operating one of the lesser efficient organizations. You either fully fund them or you don't fund them all. So the question is, which ones should you fund and how much should they get? So my suggestion is it's probably easiest if you do this on Excel, although it's not strictly necessary. There's certain things you got to do on Excel, like external rate of return. This one you don't have to do it on Excel, but it's simpler if you do. So I'm going to pause from talking for a moment. I'll just set up some columns as an illustration. It may already, I guess you've already got your columns here that are defined. The one thing that you haven't got is the cumulative amount spent column. Okay, I'm going to do the calculations for this top table on the screen if you'd like to watch, but if you're working, you can continue if you're making good progress and you feel confident what you're doing. Total cost, of course, is the number of people multiplied by the cost per person. And let me just format this as money. The poachers per year was given. Cost per poacher arrested. So I've just copied and pasted this top list in order of most efficient at the top, least efficient at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to do this last column now, the cumulative amount spent. So if you're only operating organization C, then that means you're just spending the $168,000 a year. So it's just that total cost over on the left side. But if you're doing A and C, if those are both in operation, then it is the total cost for organization A plus this total, the amount from organization C. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to show you, so look at the formula. See how it's in color? D10, D11, and then it's blue and red. So that kind of helps you to see what cells are going into the formula. I think it might be better if we say this. It is this amount plus this amount. And the advantage of that is that then we can drag this down. Whereas if we had done it the other way, we'd have to manually type in the equation for each one of the cells. You know, like if I was doing the thing of it is this plus that, then for the next one I have to say equals this and that one and that one. You get the same number, but it's just maybe a little more slick if we say the one above it and the one that's coming with this particular organization. All right, so the question was, if your $5 million is the limit for a $5 million budget limit, then you should operate C, A, and E. The total cost will be $4,538,000. The problem says no partial funding. If there was partial funding allowed, then you'd take your remaining $400,000 and you'd give that to organization B, and they'd hire as many people as they can for $400,000. They wouldn't be up to full capacity. But this problem said no partial funding. So how many poachers will be arrested? It will be the three organizations that are going, the sum of these three amounts. So 495. So if we spend the $4.5 million, then we expect 495 poachers to be arrested in the coming year. Does anybody need to see a certain thing one more time before we move on to something else? That idea that I just showed you in this last column is important for the project. I think I have an example spreadsheet from the project, and I want to show it to you. Here we go. Because of that idea that I showed you of like the cell above it plus the one from that row. Let's see. It's a little too dark, right? You'll fall asleep. All right, so here's the spreadsheet. And the reason why I'm showing it is I would really be so happy if no students made a certain mistake this year. Because if you make this particular mistake, it's hard to justify giving you anything better than a C on the project. But if you don't make the mistake, the sky's the limit. Okay, so the income every year you can see is going up, and there's this particular person has another tab where they are doing things like their income and expenses. You don't have to have these extra tabs. In fact, from a grading standpoint, I find it a little bit difficult to follow because every person has their spreadsheet formatted differently. If it's useful to you, feel free. What you do have to have is this page. This page is required, and it says that on the assignment handout. You have to have a page where for every year of your career, you've got the amount that you've earned, regular expenses, and extraordinary expenses. And so then look, the amount saved is income minus expenses. By definition, the money that comes in that doesn't go out stays with you. So that's how much you saved just this year. Is the difference between what came in this year and what came out this year. This isn't the amount that was saved in your whole life. This is just the amount saved in this particular year. All right. Now, let me make a correction. He did these calculations on another page that just makes it harder to see. So I'm just going to make this adjustment so that it's more visible in this demo that we're going to do. All right, so in the first year of your career, let's say that you start with 0. You know, like before this first year, you didn't have any money in the bank. And maybe in your case, you do have some money in the bank. Like maybe you're going to graduate with college with $1,000 or something, and that's great. You can incorporate that into the project. But if you had nothing before, then your savings balance will just be how much you saved this year. All right, and if you just barely saved it, then you wouldn't have any yield this year. You know, because the money that you, the interest you earn is on how much you had saved last year. Like if we're doing this in 1-year increments, like at the end of the year is when you get all your income, it's when you get all your expenses, it's when you get your interest and so on. We're just doing this for simplicity on an annual basis so that all of the inflows and outflows happen at the end of the period. Okay, so what that means is your savings balance for the first year is just how much you saved this year. Now, your investment yield is going to be last year's cumulative savings balance multiplied by the interest rate you're assuming that your assets are going to make. And so, you know, you've done some research about the value of the stock market, and you're maybe thinking, I'll have some of my money in stocks, some of it in a savings account, some of it in bonds. And so you're calculating a weighted average rate of return. And you've done those weighted averages before on a couple of occasions this semester. And so that's what this percentage rate is the weighted average that you expect to make on all of your savings. Some of it's going to be in a 401k. Some of your savings will be in a checking or savings account. It's going to be in a variety of places. And we don't have to get hung up on where it is. It's just you need to know what's the average rate of return that you're going to make on those assets. And so this $703 is just, for simplicity's sake, see how it says 10.1%? I'm going to change that to 10%. So 10%. So it's more obvious. The $694, that's how much interest you make, because for a whole year, the second year, you had $69.43 in the bank. All right, so now, what's your cumulative savings balance at the end of the second year? It's going to be how much money you had in the bank last year, plus the amount you saved this year, and also the interest that you made. So there's three components to it. It's last year's cumulative savings balance plus the amount that was saved this year. So that $10,486, that's just the new savings, the difference between income and outflow during 2022. And then also the cumulative savings balance includes the amount of interest that was made on last year's savings. All right. So then we can drag this down all the way and see how the cumulative savings balance is growing over time. It looks like some years he's spending more than he's earning because of extraordinary expenses. So look at the amount saved is sometimes negative, but because he's still making interest on the cumulative savings balance, there's only a couple of years where it goes down. So it's kind of an interesting process, this financial planning. And of course it can be iterative. If you find out as you're doing these calculations that your cumulative savings balance just never gets very high, well, then you can readjust your plan. You can say, maybe I won't buy a new RV every 5 years. Maybe I'll just use hotels or a tent. And so you'll change your expense estimates, and then your cumulative savings balance will go up. Or maybe it's showing that you have like $35 million by the time you're 40. Probably that means that you've either overestimated your income potential or you've forgotten some expense. And one common expense that people forget is income tax. You know, if you so-called make $80,000 a year, that's not what you actually take home. You're going to have a lot of deductions. There's going to be health insurance deductions. There's going to be, here in Huntington, you got to pay a Huntington user fee and parking deduction, Medicare, Social Security, taxes. What I think, if you remember to include taxes and you calculate this cumulative savings balance correctly, then that's a really good sign that you've put some thought into the project. So, all right, well, that's all I've got for you today. Let's just take one last look that the assignment 9 is due on Monday before class. So that's it. I will see you on Monday.